The Rams lay an egg in week one, but is there good news on the horizon? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Travis Rogers, your host for Locked On Rams. I also host the Rams pre-half and post-game show on their flagship station, ESPN 710. We'll get that one going on Sunday morning at about 11 o'clock. So if you are out and about and want to check that out, that is a good way to do it as well. Okay, here's what I want to get to on the show today. I thought Sean McVay had some interesting things to say about Cam Akers' initial performance on Thursday night against the Buffalo Bills. We'll revisit that and unpack what that means exactly. If I'm Cam Akers, I do not like what I heard. I can tell you that for sure. Plus, I want to talk about that offensive line and the work that they did in the opener and how much better it's going to need to be against the Atlanta Falcons coming up here in week 2. But let's get started right here. The Rams game on Thursday against the Bills was an unequivocal failure, right? It was a 21-point defeat, 31-10, a 3-touchdown smackdown, however you want to characterize it. It was lopsided. And going into Friday morning and Saturday, you're feeling, that not only looked bad, but that looked exceptionally bad. Now, a couple of days more have gone by, and I think that there are some silver linings here. Now, maybe not silver linings, but at least things that you can be optimistic about moving forward into weeks 2 through the end of the season. Number one, let's start here. So there's still one game left. There's Monday night's game between Seattle and Denver coming up, but we've seen 30 of the 32 teams. Did you see anybody on Buffalo's level? Maybe Kansas City, right? Rams play them later in the year. But Kansas City and Buffalo look to be on a totally different level than everybody else. And I would argue that Buffalo was even better because the opponent that Buffalo played in the Rams, I think, is a little more stout than Arizona. Certainly defensively a little more stout than Arizona. I should say that Buffalo is more stout defensively than Arizona. So I think that the Rams played the best team in the league on Thursday night. Now, they still got smoked. It doesn't really change anything for the way they played. But watching what we watched in week 1, Buffalo looks to be the best team in the NFL. Okay. And again, it's week 1. It is the ultimate overreaction and everything that comes along with that. Okay. Number 2. Did you look at those other NFC teams yesterday? Did you look at the rest of the conference? The Rams, Seattle will more than likely lose tonight to Denver. So we'll see. Rams, the entire conference is going to have lost their opening game. The entire NFC or conference league or division, I should say. The entire NFC West division is going to be 0-1 if Denver takes care of the Seahawks tonight. So the good news is you're not chasing anybody in your division. The good news is it really doesn't look like you're going to have anybody in your conference that's really going to lay it out there week in and week out and be a great team. Let me say it again. It's week 1. Everybody overreacts to week 1. Last year in week 1, the Green Bay Packers got beat 38-3 by the New Orleans Saints, and they ended up going 14-3. Okay, so I understand that this stuff can change quickly, right? And that it can, 1 week does not necessarily have anything to do with what it's going to look like in October or anything else. That being said, let's talk about the best teams in the NFC coming into this. The Rams were a favorite to win the NFC. They looked terrible. They looked like a team that couldn't play offense. They looked like a team that had trouble up front. They looked like a team that couldn't run the ball. Matthew Stafford looked like he was running for his life. And the defense was not nearly as stout as it's been in the last couple of seasons, right? We know that as Rams fans. But let's kind of go down the list. Well, who was the other team that was at the top of the preseason power rankings when it came to NFC teams? Tampa Bay last night. Now, they won their game. They're the only team on this list that, and not the only team, but they're one of the teams that won in the NFC that won comfortably. And we'll get to Dallas in a second. But let's just, did watching that game last night, what was the takeaway? Was the takeaway that Dallas was terrible? Or was the takeaway that Tampa was really good? For me, it was more that Dallas was Tampa couldn't get into the end zone. They scored one touchdown. I get it. Dallas has a nice defense, but one touchdown, Tom Brady. Tom Brady didn't look very good. Tom Brady did not mean, oh boy, he's back again. I maybe I am in the extreme minority, but Tom Brady does not keep me up at night as somebody that the Rams struggle with, or at least they haven't so far in the last couple of years since he's been in Tampa. I feel okay in that matchup. And watching them play against Dallas last night, all right. I mean, it was okay. So take Tampa and say, at least they're 1-0. At least they won their game. But I'm not worried about Tampa. Again, it's another team that the Rams will see later on. Let's go to their opponent last night. The Cowboys' season is basically over, right? I mean, I don't mean to throw shade on them, but they, first of all, with Dak Prescott, they scored 3 points. Opening drive, go down, get 3. You're like, okay, that looked pretty good. And after that, nothing. And it wasn't just that, they couldn't get open. It wasn't that they couldn't run. They didn't do anything on off. It reminded me a little bit of the Rams and that there was literally nothing going on right there. And then adding to the fact that Dak Prescott has a hand injury that's going to require some surgery. He's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. The Cowboys didn't look good with him. What are they going to look without him? So all of a sudden, Dallas, the NFC opens up a little bit more. So stay in the NFC East, right? Well, what about Philadelphia? They were another playoff team from last year. They're a team that a lot of people think have a chance to go to the NFC Championship game, maybe sneak into the Super Bowl. They had their hands full with the Detroit Lions. Now, maybe Detroit's a little bit better than we thought, but did you see that defense? That if the Lions are putting up points like that, not worried about Philadelphia. I've never been worried about Jalen Hurts. So all of a sudden, we've got that going on with Philadelphia. Okay, let's keep it going. San Francisco. Now, yes, it was in a monsoon in Chicago. The water was everywhere and the field was a mess. And whenever you get conditions like that, take it with a massive grain of salt. But here's what I know to be true. They spent their third draft pick, number 3 overall, on Trey Lance a couple of years ago. Jimmy Garoppolo had them within a drive of going back to the Super Bowl for the second time in 3 years last year. Jimmy Garoppolo did not get traded or released. Jimmy Garoppolo is still there. Trey Lance is the, air quotes, starting quarterback for as long as it's going to take for them to get one game where they have no choice. Because here's what's going to happen. Those guys in that locker room know what Jimmy G can do. Those guys in that locker room have won games with Jimmy Garoppolo. They're under no misconceptions that it's Joe Montana or Steve Young, but they also know that he can play NFL quarterback. Trey Lance right now has a very short leash. The second Jimmy G came back with that team, they started thinking about what they could do with him in the event that Trey Lance isn't up for it. And guess what? He wasn't up for it in week 1. Bad field. I understand everything that comes along with it, but San Francisco 0-1, playing against a team that a lot of people think might be the worst team in the NFL. I understand. It was in the rain, blah, 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 blah. He looked awful. So San Francisco looked terrible, right? New Orleans, what about them, right? New Orleans needed a miracle to beat the Falcons, who were coming into SoFi Stadium coming up here in week 2. So New Orleans is one of those teams that all of a sudden you don't feel great about. And then lastly, at the very top of all of this, were the Green Bay Packers, who got beat by Minnesota, who looked pretty good. But again, Minnesota didn't put up 40 points. They just didn't let Green Bay get anything going. Green Bay had 1 touchdown. They missed Devontae Adams something fierce. Aaron Rodgers seems like he's already over whatever it is he's got to deal with his young wide receiver group. The Packers, I know it happened last season. They ended up winning 14 games, number 1 seed, et cetera, et cetera. But that was a Packer. That team looked slow. It looked disjointed. It did not look like it was ready to go, which is potentially good news for the Rams too, because they've got to play of these teams. They play Green Bay, they play Dallas, they play San Francisco, they play Tampa, they play, they play New Orleans. They're going to play these teams in the NFC. And look, fact of the matter is, none of them looked all that impressive in week 1. So if you're looking for something to say, okay, look, that's a terrible start for the Rams, and it was, the good news is that no one else in the NFC looking, oh boy, we got to go get to that level. Wasn't one team that made you think like that over the weekend. Okay, so how do we get ready for week 2? How do the Rams improve on what they did in week 1? Because they got a lot of improvement to do. We'll focus on that offensive line and who needs to play a lot better against the Atlanta Falcons. That's coming up on Locked On Rams. Have you done it yet? You really need to do it. Honestly, you need to go and check out these videos at brite.co/locked on. They are these unbelievable videos of proposals and things that have just gone wrong. And all of a sudden, a very nice, expensive piece of jewelry is just gone. It's over the cliff. It's out of the hot air balloon. It's into the waterfall. It's down the river. And it's funny and sad and all of these things. But here's the lesson. You don't want to be that guy. And this is why BriteCo Jewelry Insurance made sure that you get a replacement for the full value of that ring, no matter whether you lose it, you get stolen, you don't know what the heck happened to it. Here's how you do it. You go to brite.co/locked on to get the fastest and easiest and cheapest way to cover your you-know-what with the best jewelry insurance in the business. They are geniuses, the guys at BriteCo. They made buying insurance for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever you want to insure so incredibly easy you can get it covered in 2 minutes on your cell phone. Let me tell you again. Brite.co/locked on. Look, insurance, we all know what it's about, right? They turn the whole experience around. It's probably the easiest thing you're going to do for yourself this week. No excuses. $5 a month, totally comprehensive coverage, and it won't take you more than 2 minutes on your phone. Check it out one more time. Brite.co/locked on and go watch those videos. Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you click that subscribe button in your podcast feed so you get it each and every day and you're up to speed on all things LA Rams. Okay. Week 1, defense, not great. Offense, particularly not great. The coaching, I think was particularly good. Matthew Stafford, not good. Allen Robinson, not good. Just right on down the line of guys that probably underperformed, with the exception of Cooper Kupp, who had kind of a typical Cooper Kupp sort of day. But I think of all of the things, if you were triaging, right, like in the world of when there's a disaster and they bring everybody to the hospital at the same time, you have to figure out who we're going to treat first, right? Who's mortally wounded and who just has a broken leg. We can get to them later, right? You got to figure out who's the most important person to go to the hospital first. So I'm sure that's what Sean McVay is doing with his team right now, figuring out where are the areas that need to be addressed first so we can get all the other things done later. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have landed on the offensive line. Put it to you this way. Hey, do you want to call Andrew Whitworth and see what he's up to? Do you want to see if he's entirely married to the idea of doing Amazon TV and not coming back and playing one more year? Because that's how bad the offensive line was in week 1. The numbers themselves are jarring, upsetting, discouraging, however you want to say it. We know that they got Matthew Stafford sacked 7 times. And look, Matthew Stafford, he might take one once in a while because he wants to hold on to that ball for the last second so he can fire it in there. But this is not a guy that takes a bunch of bad sacks because he's Jared Goff just standing back there waiting. That's not what he is. So they got to him 7 times. It wasn't just the fact that they sacked him 7 times either. They hit him 15 times. Look, Matthew Stafford is a tough guy. All NFL players are tough guys, but Matthew Stafford, even by NFL standards, is a tough dude. You can't have him getting hit 15 times a game. Okay, it just doesn't work. The whole league is predicated on you're not allowed to hit the guy that has the ball in his hands as the quarterback. They got to him 15 times. That is an untenable situation. That can't happen. So you have to get him some better protection up front. Okay, even when he was getting not his hands laid on him, sacked, 19 pressures. Look, you're going to get pressure in the NFL. You're going to have to deal with it. And they did all of this without blitzing, too. Keep this in mind. This was not something where they were sending the entire house at him. They didn't blitz in that game, and they still found him 19 pressures. They still got to hit him 15 times. They still sacked him 7 times. And then add this on there, the Rams didn't even run for 50 yards. The Rams got nothing done on the ground. All of these things, sacks, pressures, hits, rushing yardage, they're a direct reflection on the offensive line. And it was rough, right? And we talked about Joe Noteboom a lot. And again, there are extenuating circumstances here, but it's the NFL, right? There isn't did you do the job or you didn't? And Joe Noteboom did not do the job. The fact of the matter is, Von Miller torched him. Now, that's Von Miller, right? That's not just some guy who's in the league. That's Von Miller. That is a first ballot Hall of Fame player. That being said, You got to block Von Miller. That's the job. If you're going to be on left tackle, if you're going to have Matthew Stafford's blind side, you need to block Von Miller on Thursday. You're going to have to block a whole bunch of really good players this season that are going to line up on that edge, and he's got to do a much, much better job of that. Brian Allen in the middle, okay. Really, everyone else, all four positions. No Boom was the most glaring of the bunch because he had Miller dealing with him the entire afternoon. But even Rob Havenstein on the right tackle, not a particularly good job. The two guys in the interior, whether it was Coleman Shelton or David Edwards, not a particularly great job right there. It is the most basic, obvious thing. Like, you got to have a good quarterback. You got to have a good coach. Those are the things that are like the ante in poker. If you don't have that, well, what are we even doing here? But beyond that, the very most important thing after those two is, can you give the quarterback time to do what you're giving him all that money to do? You look, unless you're Michael Vick or one of these guys, you can just run around and make stuff happen out of thin air. And we know how long that lasts. Not very. You're going to need to give those guys some time. It doesn't have to be 10 seconds where they can sit back there and make an omelet, but you need to be able to let him get back there, hit that back foot, take a look, and rip it. And that's not what was happening. That's what they were really good at last year. That's something that they, I think, took a great deal of pride in being able to do last year, is keep Matthew Stafford up, on time, on target, and allow him to do what he does best. That was not the case. That is and again, looking at Atlanta coming in, right? This is not Buffalo. This is an Atlanta team that is not expected to be a particularly formidable team this year. If that doesn't improve and improve markedly, then I think we're going to see some maybe switches, changes, shuffling calls, new rumors. The Rams are not reactionary, but they're also not just going to sit around and wait for 5, 8, 10 weeks to go by to decide, okay, we need to do something. They're aggressive. They know that they're in their window right now. Like we just talked about it a minute ago, the NFC is wide open. There wasn't anybody in the NFC yesterday that you can go, that team right there looked great. They're still very much in it, despite how bad they looked in week one. They need to get that offensive line fixed, though. That's something that has to happen, and it needs to start happening against the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, so if with that in mind, what's the next thing that needs to happen after that? Somebody needs to step up as a running back here for the LA Rams. That's around the corner. It's next on Locked On Rams. So how'd you do in your fantasy this weekend, right? Yeah, that's why you got to get in your daily fantasy. And this is why PrizePicks as the best daily fantasy site for you, because it's not a season-long thing. It's not an absolutely, one guy goes out and you're cooked. That's not how it worked at PrizePicks. You look at a player, you look at some numbers, and you decide, they going over or under. For instance, Patrick Mahomes, more than 320. Derrick Henry, more or less than 85. Cooper Kupp, is he going to get a touchdown or no? Tyreek Hill, is he going to catch more than 3.5 passes? These are the sorts of ideas. These are the sorts of numbers. These are the projections that you have to beat. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their prize pick projections, and you get to see them right up there, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people, other groups, just you versus the projections available. Football, basketball, baseball, hockey, golf, college football, you name it, they've got Euro basketball, cricket. They got all of your stuff covered. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is just that easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. And if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Okay, so there were not many things that went right for the Rams on Thursday against the Buffalo Bills, but I think one of the things that, in order, number one, Allen Robinson, 1 target. Number 2, Jalen Ramsey, who did not have a good game. In fact, it may have been one of the worst games of his entire NFL career. But coming on the heels of that, very close behind that, is the performance of the Rams running back group, and specifically Cam Akers. Number 1, expected to be the starter. He was not. That went to Darrell Henderson, who was okay. Not great, but at least was okay and made a couple of positive plays along the way. Cam Akers had 3 touches. Cam Akers gained 0 yards in those 3 touches. And what have we said about Sean McVay over and over again on Locked On Rams? This is why you need to subscribe to it every single day. Sean McVay is going to tell you the truth. Sean McVay is going to tell you what's on his mind. You just need to speak his language. You need to understand how he characterizes things, because what he said about Cam Akers is interesting. Quote, the opportunities were minimal. There were some things that within each of those individual plays that I think that we can do better collectively, starting with me, then to the players around him, but also with Cam. And so it's more of a reflection of the confidence that I know he can be. And I'm confident that he'll be that guy that we've all seen at the right moments as this season continues to progress. And that's our job, to get it out of him. Okay. I don't love that if I'm Cam Akers. What I'm hearing with that is, listen, offensive line wasn't great. I wasn't great. But what we need to make sure is that he's ready to go when it's time to go, that he needs to maximize his opportunities when he's out there. That is not that's not the talk of, look, the line was no good. We weren't having any passing game. That was, look, I couldn't use the guy because he wasn't ready to go. He's not going to say it quite like that, but that's what I'm hearing when I hear a comment like that. When you only see him use, and because this wasn't, look, he wasn't healthy. It was we decided to go with Darrell Henderson. This is a guy that when he came in was expected to be the number one back, who was the number one back and then got hurt, landed on the ball. Remember, had the rib injury. And then fast forward to that season, towards the end of that season, he was killing it. He was the guy. And now he gets hurt in the preseason last year, right? Not even the preseason, like the OTA season, misses virtually the entire regular season, comes back in the playoffs and isn't very good. Now you come back fully healthy, ready to go to start your third year in the NFL, and it's already, well, he's going to need to maximize some of his opportunities. That happened fast. That happened really quickly. This is a guy that was the future of your running back position, to a guy that you immediately gave the job back to when he came back from that Achilles injury, to a guy that needs to, air quote, maximize his opportunities. My advice to Cam Akers is he needs to have a game against the Atlanta Falcons, because, and I'm not saying that this is about to happen, but we've seen it when guys fall out of favor. We've seen it when all of a sudden they don't think it's going to go anymore. They don't use that. Todd Gurley went from somebody who was a MVP candidate, one of the best players in the league, to somebody who wasn't on the field. Okay, so if Cam Akers thinks that it'll come back around, well, maybe or maybe not. We've seen them struggle with this stuff before. We've seen them have to go in a different direction. We know that running backs are, I don't want to say easy to find, but easier to find than some other places. You saw that Sony Michel with the Chargers yesterday. He was out there and making a pretty big impact. I would imagine that he's not the only player that the Rams are looking at saying, we could bring a guy like that in and maybe getting a little more out of our guys. Darrell Henderson needs to play better too. The offensive line needs to play better. Matthew Stafford needs to play better. Allen Robinson needs to make sure that he gets himself open so they can get him the ball more. All of those things are true, but Cam Akers may be at the top of that list, a guy who should have his head on a swivel, because that feels like an opportunity missed to start, was given a very small handful of opportunities to make it happen in the opener, and it just didn't. And the coach kind of had we'll see. He needs to play. We all need to play a little better, him included. Never what you want to hear. Sean McVay is pretty honest about what he thinks about what his guys are doing. And what I'm hearing right there is that was not good enough. He was not ready. He was not prepared to maximize his opportunities. We'll see what it looks like against the Atlanta Falcons. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now make your second listen the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.